Since Disney took over Lucasfilm, we've been treated to a myriad of legacy characters that returned as different.
Go away!
Luke, Han, Leia, Obi-Wan, Vader, Indiana Jones, Boba Fett, and don't forget Sheev, they all returned and then were swiftly assassinated. Why? Sometimes it was because their writer wanted to prop up their new character.
What'd you do?
I bypassed the compressor.
Sometimes it was because the writer explicitly wants to destroy stories. Sometimes it was because the writer was incompetently lazy with their stories.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Sometimes it was because the writer was desperately devoid of any creative ideas. Actually, that last reason kind of sums up every one of these situations. Regardless of the specific scenario, one theme runs through them all. The writers didn't care. They didn't care about the legacies of the characters they were working with. They didn't care about the goodwill fans had toward these characters because of who they once were. They saw them as nothing more than a prop for them to use. Now, the Ahsoka show ought to be different, right? Here we have a unique case. In all the other examples referenced, legacy characters were acquired and fell under the stewardship of new producers and, more importantly, new writers. But not Ahsoka. Dave Filoni headed up this show, and these are his characters, so he would treat them with respect. These will be the same characters people knew from Rebels and the Clone Wars. You would certainly think that. So how did Dave Filoni do it, keeping his characters true to their original selves? Well, let's take a look at a couple scenes from the old animated shows and compare them to corresponding scenes in Ahsoka. In the Season 2 finale of Star Wars Rebels, Ahsoka must confront her fallen master twice, first in a vision, then in real life. As his Padawan, Ahsoka watched Anakin flirt with the dark side of the Force. She saw his anger flare up as he slowly drifted away from the light. Although this behavior sometimes alarmed her, she trusted him and believed in his ultimate good.
He is like no other Jedi. Passionate, impulsive, but I trust him with my life.
When Ahsoka is in the Sith Temple on Malachor, it is revealed that she in some part blames herself for Anakin's fall to the dark side.
You were selfish.
No!
You abandoned me! You failed me!
Anakin's weakness that eventually became his downfall was his susceptibility to attachment. Yoda saw through this immediately.
Your thoughts dwell on your mother.
Afraid to lose her, I think.
What has that got to do with anything?
Everything.
Ahsoka is convinced that she was a tether to the light for Anakin, and her decision to leave the Jedi Order and him contributed to his fall. And she knows what happened as a result. The Jedi Order was exterminated, and the galaxy was subjugated by the rule of the Empire. So great is Ahsoka's guilt that when she comes face to face with her fallen master again,
Ahsoka.
Anakin.
rather than take the chance to escape and continue to aid the rebellion, she declares that she will stay with him now, like she should have then.
I won't leave you. Not this time.
Even if it means dying at his hand.
Then you will die.
Until they undid that with the stupidest creation ever.
Ahsoka!
Years later, she meets Mando and Grogu, who are looking for her to train Grogu. After seeing his impressive command of the Force for a baby, she decides not to train him due to his evident attachment to Mando, despite the fact that he's a literal baby and the person he's formed an attachment to is the man that has been keeping him alive. Now, this episode, like the entire show, sucked. But Ahsoka did remain consistent. She knows the damage Anakin's attachment caused, so she's hyper-cautious about enabling anyone with any semblance of that quality with knowledge of the Force. But all that is undermined by the knowledge that at this point, she had already attempted to train Sabine. At no point in this show does Sabine display any qualities desired of Jedi. She is insubordinate, reckless, disrespectful, selfish, and she has basically zero capacity to use the Force.
I have known many Padawans over the centuries, and I can safely say your aptitude for the Force would fall short of them all.
But most of all, she has a problematic attachment to Ezra.
This isn't just about finding Ezra. It's about preventing another war.
Knowing this, it being more clear in Sabine than it was in Grogu or Anakin, Ahsoka agrees to take her back as her Padawan and takes her on a mission that brings her in close contact with said attachment. And in the end, Sabine lets her attachment drive her to a decision that threatens to doom the entire galaxy. So first, Ahsoka's master's fear of loss ends with the galaxy in subjugation to the Empire. Then, Ahsoka's apprentice's fear of loss, allegedly, brings the galaxy to the brink of resubjugation to that empire. So what is Ahsoka's reaction to seeing her old master in the immediate aftermath of this? Does she break down in tears at her repeated failure? Does she beg for advice? Does she lash out at him for making her feel this guilt? Does she apologize in a desperate attempt at lifting the burden she feels?
You look the same.
You look old.
Well, that happens.
She responds with mild confusion and stoic indifference. This Ahsoka is unaffected by the things that happen in the life of past Ahsoka, as if those characters have nothing connecting them but their name and appearance. In Season 3 of Star Wars Rebels, Sabine gets her most compelling character arc, low bar, of the series in Trials of the Darksaber. The Mandalorians have this dumb custom that whoever wields this stupid black lightsaber can unite one of the Mandalorian clans, which is how Darth Maul ended up in charge of these clowns.
I claim this sword, and my rightful place as leader of Death Watch.
The crew tries to convince Sabine to use the blade to do just that, but she's very resistant.
I don't know if you realize this, but I'm not that popular with my family these days.
She has no desire to see her family again, but agrees to the proposition because of the benefit it presents to their cause to liberate Lothal.
If there's a chance that you can rally an army of Mandalorian warriors to our cause, I have to ask you to do it.
The rest of the episode shows Sabine training with Kanan and Ezra, struggling with the process. As her frustration mounts, Sabine storms off, and we learn a bit of why she's so determined to avoid her family.
I'm a disgrace to them, Ezra. A traitor.
But that's not true.
To them, it is.
They think her a traitor. She's ashamed and can't imagine that they would ever accept her. When she returns, Kanan pushes her to her mental and emotional limit.
You're not fighting me. You're fighting yourself. And losing.
Attacking her ego.
You're not committed to this. You should quit.
Inciting her anger to the point she's looking for kill shots.
You did run, didn't you?
Accusing her of the things she fears her people will.
But that's what your people believe, isn't it?
Repeating the lies they believe about her.
You ran from the Empire. You ran from your family.
Finally, he breaks her, and the anger, fear, and sadness she's been hiding for so long, even from those closest to her, all boil over.
Truth is it? I left to save everyone.
It turns out, when Sabine was in the Imperial Academy, she helped build weapons that specifically targeted Mandalorians.
I built weapons. Terrible weapons! But the Empire used them on Mandalore.
She blamed herself for the destruction caused.
Mandalore! Fear of weapons I helped create! I helped enslave my people!
When Sabine saw the damage they could do to her people, she decided to stand up against the Empire.
I spoke out to save them! To save everyone!
But when she took her stand, as Sabine says,
my family didn't stand with me. They chose the Empire. They left me. Gave me no choice.
Sabine could have stayed by her family's side. She could have served the Empire dutifully and kept her family's favor and not ended up alone. But instead, Sabine selflessly sacrificed all that she had, her family, her clan, to try and save them, knowing she would end up alone. And it crushes her. She only copes with it knowing she made the right call.
The Empire wanted to destroy worlds, and they did. They destroyed mine.
And in Ahsoka, she puts the entire galaxy at risk and undoes the sacrifice Ezra made just so she can see her friend again. Then, when she finally does reunite with him, she makes no mention of what she's done so they can immediately try to stop Thrawn from returning to their galaxy.
I just want to be happy that I found you. After all this time, can I have that?
She decides to screw over the entire galaxy so she can hang out with her friend again. And the acting is so bad, she doesn't even seem excited to see him.
Typical. Always a plan. Never a good one.
I mean, I'm more excited to see my dog after work than she is to see her long-lost friend who was presumed dead for 7 years. It's difficult to see how the different versions of both these characters were written by the same person, without an Acme anvil falling out of the sky on his head. I've heard the criticism that just because you can write and direct in an animated medium doesn't mean you can replicate it in live action. But that goes far more to the directing side of things than the writing. Dave Filoni's inexperience with directing live action can account for the terrible combat sequences. People can't do what you have characters in cartoons do, and using equipment and special effects to mirror it likely ends up looking really goofy. It can help account for the terrible acting done by multiple actors who have shown their ability to perform well in other projects. You have to work with the actors to bring out the emotions and expressions you want in live action. You can't just leave it up to animators and voice actors to do all the heavy lifting. Only Ray Stevenson puts in a decent performance in this show. It helps that Baylan Skoll is the only interesting character in the show, too. But Dave Filoni's inexperience with live action cannot account for screwing up fundamental building blocks of characters, especially characters that, once again, have already had those foundations laid. Maybe the fault lies on the shoulders of Disney. The Clone Wars wasn't a Disney show, and Season 7 and Rebels were more side projects. Maybe this is Kathleen Kennedy inserting herself into the project and poisoning it as she seems determined to do to all Lucasfilm projects she possibly can. But Andor was great. That one slipped through the cracks, including it seems in viewership, which is tragic. Maybe it is good old white Kamala Harris.
That's the thing about movies. I'm always like, really? We built this?
That is a reflection of joy, because, you know, it comes in the morning.
Or maybe it's something that most people seem unwilling to accept. Something that became clear to some of us as soon as we saw Season 1 of The Mandalorian. Dave Filoni is not a good writer. He wrote some episodes for one of the most overrated shows of all time. But oh wait, he didn't even write them, just directed. He was hired to direct The Clone Wars by George Lucas, but George was heavily involved in the creation of that show.
And how many times did you hear sometimes you'd come back for pickups?
Yeah.
George changed the line to this, or he wants you to do it more like this, or he wants that. I mean, that's right. When I first started it wasn't totally clear to me how involved George Lucas was.
Yeah.
So as things like that kept happening, or as I would visit Lucasfilm more and more, I started realizing, I'm like, oh, this is significant.
This is.
And, you know, Dave will tell you himself, he's like, oh, the stories come from George.
Yeah.
Sure, Dave had a hand in here's how we're going to do it and blah, blah, blah. But the stories themselves are these George Lucas stories that he wants to get across.
Even Season 7 had George's hand in it. No, Dave Filoni's writing ability, when given maximum creative freedom, has been showcased in The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, and most of all, in Ahsoka. He's written every episode, and it's terrible. The reason Ahsoka and Sabine were portrayed completely differently in this show than they were in previous iterations is because Dave Filoni didn't write those original pieces. Even in Rebels, he doesn't get first billing as writer. If you think Dave Filoni is going to save Star Wars, I don't know what to tell you. He won't. All your favorite things you think he's responsible for, he's not. At least he wasn't the creativity behind them. And that's what Star Wars is in desperate need of. New ideas executed by competent writers and directors. Not CGI smoke-infested flashbacks and cheap cameos to temporarily pull at the nostalgic heartstrings of shallow fans, but which fall apart completely when given any modicum of rational thought. It needs more Andor and less cowboy hat.